Craig Zen is a perfect example of a side character in the rap game. He's somebody who's always around, you've heard his name, and he's definitely popular in his own way, but he's never really hit those heights of some other rappers that he's been around, namely Lil Peep and XXXTentacion. Because somehow he found himself in the shadow of Lil Peep, only to go over to members only for a new start, to once again find himself in the shadow of a much more popular artist. It's kind of funny how that works, but the weirdest part about this story is that he actually full on retired and hasn't made music for over 4 years. So a lot of people are starting to wonder what happened to him, why did he leave, and that's what I'm going to try to find out today when I look into the story of Craig Zen. Craig J. Gorwin was born October 24th, 1994 in Houston, Texas, to a white mom and a black dad, which of course made him a mixed kid, which would actually lead to a couple issues during his childhood, because of course he was too white for the black kids and too black for the white kids, which made it very difficult for him to meet friends during the time that he was in school, and on top of that, he was an only child as well, meaning that he felt very isolated throughout most of his early childhood. And if that wasn't bad enough, he also suffered from bipolar disorder and was abused pretty heavily during his early years, and he actually ended up blacking out most of that until he was about 18 years old. But all the abuse came from his father's side of things, and he actually ended up going to jail when Craig was only around 3 years old, so he was mostly raised by his mother, who was a pretty good parent to him. But even with that good parental figure in his life, he still had it pretty rough, so he would often turn to music for an escape and a companion. And luckily for him, on his father's side of things, rapping was actually seen as a positive because both his uncle and cousin were already doing it, so it wasn't too hard for him to transition over as well. And his uncle actually produced a pretty big song for the Ghetto Boys called Mind Playing Tricks on You, and because of that, Craig would even meet Scarface as a child. So he was always surrounded by hip hop even from an early age, with him freestyling as far back as the age of 6 alongside his cousin. But he only really fell in love with hip hop once he started listening to the rapper Eminem. You see, Craig had always seen himself as an outcast within his family as well as just in general, so listening to somebody like Eminem, who was really pushing the boundaries of hip hop, really inspired him to get into it as well. And luckily for us, unlike 90% of people who listen to Eminem and were inspired by him, he didn't get into the lyrical miracle type of rap, he actually went in a different direction. There's definitely a timeline out there where Craig Zen became another Tom MacDonald, and he was the one who actually got a feature with Ben Shapiro, which honestly might have made him a bigger rapper in the grand scheme of things, but I'm pretty happy we don't live in that timeline. But on top of being inspired by Eminem, he was also heavily inspired by Lil B because he saw him as a more positive rapper that would rap about things besides gang violence and other stuff of that nature. And yes, before you ask, he also was inspired by Bones. Basically everybody in the SoundCloud wave was inspired by Bones, I don't even have to say it anymore. But even though he really enjoyed music, he was often too nervous to record anything because he would smoke a lot of get really anxious and paranoid and wouldn't be able to get on the mic and spit anything. Until one day when Craig was smoking with his uncle and he told him to get on a song that he was creating called Higher Than a Bitch because of course Craig was higher than a. Unfortunately, we can no longer listen to this song because it's not up on his SoundCloud, and we only really have one mention of it in the No Jumper interview, so we don't know what it sounds like at all. But either way, Craig Zen was officially born. If you're wondering where the name Craig Zen comes from, well, his name is Craig, and Zen was apparently inspired by him doing a lot of during high school, which he would later turn into meditation before finally saying the name came from the fact that he found his Zen when he would record, which then became Craig Zen with an X because of course you can't have a SoundCloud rapper from 2015 that doesn't have some sort of X in their name. I'm looking at you, Killswitch, you actually got 2 X's in your name, so you're a double SoundCloud rapper. Unfortunately though, music wasn't really filling that empty hole that he had within himself, so he would try to fill it with other things like more weed of course, and more which are all kind of in the same camp but different in different ways. So on one hand, he was kind of finding himself and becoming more spiritually aware, but on the other hand, he was closely approaching rock bottom, with him finally deciding to quit drugs after he ended up robbing a kid, taking all his and then smoking it with his friends. But after he ended up doing that, he still felt very empty inside and felt like everybody around him were just fake friends. So he decided to quit it once and for all, deleted all his friends' numbers out of his phone, and went back to his mom's house to try to sober up. But during that point, he would actually hit his rock bottom, crying in the shower while listening to Bones, realizing that he felt completely alone once again, and that whether or not he was on he was always going to feel this way. So in a very desperate act, he decided to hop online and try to give his heart to Jesus, but that didn't work either. So eventually his mom called his grandmother and took him to a 30-day detox where he was able to find his higher power and turn his life around. So in a weird turn of events, I guess giving his heart to Jesus actually did turn his life around, but his grandmother had to get involved first. Yeah, kind of a weird story, and apparently this all had to do with and not actual heart or songs, so it's hard to know if this was actually true or just something that he said on the No Jumper podcast to seem more relatable. After that, music would become his choice, and he would start recording tracks almost every day alongside his cousin, K Rillo, with the two of them eventually creating a track known as Impala on a stolen beat, which you would think would be a bad thing, but after they sent the song back to the producer, he liked it so much that he ended up resharing it on his own SoundCloud and got them their first 100 plays, which eventually became 300 plays. And after that, the SoundCloud algorithm started blessing them, and basically every track they released after that point would get another 100 plays, which isn't really a lot, but seeing as how it was still early SoundCloud, this was a pretty big deal. Him and his cousin would continue to work together for quite a while, but before long, Craig would decide to go in a more experimental direction, eventually even starting to yell over his beats. So at that point, they went in different directions, and Craig started to work more and more on dropping mixtapes throughout 2015. His next couple big breaks came when he only had 2,000 followers on the app, when both Dylan Ross and Mikey the Magician ended up reaching out to him and reposting a couple of his songs. He was a pretty big fan of them before this point, so having them reach out was definitely a big deal to him, and on top of that, he would also network with smaller artists like the upcoming rapper known as Lil Peep, or at the time it was actually Trap Goose. With the two of them initially meeting through SoundCloud messages, and funnily enough, it seems like Craig Zen was actually the one who introduced Lil Peep to Schema Posse in the first place. Which, if you don't know what that is, it was basically a big rap collective that included people like Jay Green, Cold Blooded, Ghostmane, and of course, well, Lil Peep. With Craig eventually moving to LA to join the group, dropping 3 projects during that time, known as Decay, followed by Brute the very next month, and then followed up by Zen the month after that. And this Zen project featured one song called Coom, which funnily enough actually had the same beat as Ski Mask by Smoke Perp, although Craig used it a couple months before Smoke Perp used it, and this song would get noticed by Adam22 at No Jumper, and eventually shared in a video on the channel, which would definitely help him to gain more of a buzz in the local LA scene. And at the same time, he would start dropping music with Ghostmane, dropping the track Behemoth, as well as a track with Lil Peep called Unbreakable, which actually ended up getting shared on Troll Funk, which was a YouTube channel that helped out a lot of the early Schema members to gain more of a buzz within the local scene. So at this point, things were going pretty good for Craig Zen. He was gaining more of a buzz, he definitely was seeming like one of the stars of Schema Posse, but for one reason or another, Jay Green ended up picking Ghostmane and Lil Peep over him and started treating them like they were the biggest members of the entire group, which honestly ended up pissing off everybody in the group, especially members that had been there longer than them, but Craig Zen seemed like he was the one that was most upset about this, with him not appearing on the Elemental mixtape or the Get to Know Us mixtape. And it seems like Craig Zen was especially resentful of Lil Peep since they both joined the group around the same time, and he actually brought Lil Peep into Schema Posse, and now he was overshadowing him, so they ended up dropping one more track together called California Girls, and then after that, Craig Zen would leave the group once and for all. At this point, he would start up his own group known as Infinite Militia alongside Omen 13, who was of course a friend of Pete, but at the same time, he was never really a member of Schema Posse, so it seemed like a good idea for them to start making music together, with the two of them immediately dropping a couple of videos, one appearing on Trill Funk called Solitude, which ended up doing pretty good numbers, so it seemed like Infinite Militia was off to a good start. But keep in mind, Craig leaving Schema Posse really wasn't that big of a deal because he basically only left in name alone. He still lived very closely with all the members and ended up moving in with Brendan Savage, Lil Peep, and everybody else who was in the group. And Craig actually ended up starting beef with Jay Green when the two of them were roommates, basically getting all his fans to go into the comments and say, why do you never give Craig Zen any attention? Why does he never appear on the albums? You're not pushing him as hard as everybody else. But this beef was basically fake and only really started because they were both trying to get more attention on their collaboration tracks together, so it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, but definitely interesting to mention. At this point, Craig Zen would start to do his first ever live performances alongside Schema Posse. Once again, he wasn't part of the group, but he would still do different venues with them all over the city. After that, he ended up dropping a mixtape called Resilient, which had a feature with Mikey the Magician, who at the time was trying to poach Craig Zen away from Schema Posse and get him to join Buffet Boys, but apparently Craig's ego got in the way and he was talking shit to everybody in the group, so that never ended up happening. After that, he would drop another mixtape called Waist Deep, which for some reason actually had a feature from Tyler Grosso, which if you don't know who that is, he's basically a scammer who tried to sell Lil Peep clothes after he passed away, even though Peep's mom didn't want him to. But don't worry, I'm not going to talk about Peep's mom because that's basically the closest thing to politics that you can talk about within the Peep fan base, so let's just move on to the No Jumper September interview where Craig Zen appeared alongside Tyler Grosso. Yeah, for some reason these guys remained friends. During this interview, he basically talked about his life, his backstory, but he didn't have anything to say about Schema Posse whatsoever, actually actively avoiding talking about it because I guess he didn't want to give them clout. And to make matters worse, Craig would actually drop a song with the Suicide Boys not too long after that, which was originally supposed to feature a verse from Lil Peep, but he ended up cutting him off because he didn't want to be overshadowed by him on his biggest song to date. So he instead replaced him with Omen 13 and called the track As the Bridge Burns, where it seems that he burnt the bridge with Lil Peep, or at least he would've, but of course Lil Peep was such a nice guy that he didn't really care about this, and apparently he wasn't a big fan of the Suicide Boys anyways because he didn't really like the aesthetic of Suicide as something to brand themselves with, so it wasn't a big deal, but you could tell that Craig and Peep were definitely getting into a little bit of a beef at this point. And this got even worse when Lil Peep and Craig Zen would share a room where basically Craig would be there half the time and Peep would be there the other half of the time, so Craig would end up pissing on the walls and basically destroying the room anytime he knew that Peep was about to come back, so you could tell that he definitely hated the guy. And if you're wondering why Craig didn't appear on the track Homecoming alongside all the other members of the house, it was because he was actually offered to be on the track initially, but decided to go hang out with the Buffet Boys instead. This was a pretty common thing for Craig to do because he was letting all the fame get to his head, and he thought that hanging around them would eventually get him a record deal with them or get him on tour with them or something like that, but of course it never happened. It doesn't really matter that Craig Zen didn't get on Homecoming though, because soon after that the track actually ended up getting deleted off of SoundCloud because Peep and Jay Green ended up getting in a fight over money, and Peep and Ghostman both left Schema Posse as well. Craig and Peep kept living together for a while, but eventually they would get into such heated arguments that Craig ended up turning off the power at the house even though Omen 13 was still living there, and they ended up falling out once and for all. It's uncertain if Craig Zen and Lil Peep ever made up during the time that Peep was still alive, and I know now that Peep has passed away, basically everybody's going to be on his side, but just keep in mind we don't really know what this beef started over. It might have been jealousy, it might have been ego, could have been drugs, mental illness, or anything else, but we don't have all the details, so before you attack Craig Zen, please just realize that this happened when they were both like 20 years old. It's not too crazy to think that two young guys who were getting money for the first time in their life might have a couple issues with each other, but overall it was probably just pedantic dumb stuff, so don't go after Craig at this point. He's 30, he's definitely grown, and he doesn't need any more drama from this coming into his life. But anyways, at this point Craig was basically burnt out with Schema Posse, Lil Peep, and that entire side of the underground, and after all he didn't really fit into it anyways because he was going for a lot more of an aggressive sound around the time, so he decided to join up with a new group known as Members Only. And of course you know this group, it included Ski Mask the Slump God, Kid Trunks, Flyboy Tarantino, Cooley Cut, and of course XXXTentacion. Just like Lil Peep and Craig Zen, X and Craig also met through the internet, but before long he would eventually move to Florida to be part of the group proper, dropping his final song with Lil Peep called Blueberry Lemonade, and then finally transitioning into that trap metal sound. The first track that Craig and X would drop together was called I Wonder If Bloods Like to Watch Blue's Clues, which ended up getting deleted only 24 hours after it was posted because apparently X didn't really like the song, which definitely sucked for Craig. But as soon as X got out of prison and started blowing up with Look at Me, the first track that he dropped when he got out was Blue's Clues once again, so Craig ended up blowing up with that song. It became his biggest track to date, and it's still actually his biggest track all this time later. And let's be honest, Craig is probably going to be eating off of this song for the rest of his life. It's definitely a good thing to have a song with X and Pete because after all they keep getting plays over and over again, so he never really had to make music again. But of course Craig wouldn't stop there because you already know the story at this point. The entire Members Only collective would go on the Revenge tour, and Craig actually got to be on the poster as his own individual artist alongside Ski Mask, so that's definitely cool. You could tell that he was a pretty big artist at the time. And as you already know, Wi-Fi gets punched at that first show, the tour ends up getting a lot of attention, X gets punched out on stage, somebody gets stabbed, everything goes crazy, and Craig and all the other members end up gaining a lot of clout. But unlike most of those other members who ended up leaving X behind after the Revenge tour ended and got their own deals, Craig would get his own deal, but he kept making music with X right up until the time that he passed away. The two of them ended up creating a track together called Death Wish, which was originally supposed to appear on the album Bad Vibes Forever when it came out in 2016, but after X ended up scrapping that album, the song has only survived as a snippet, but even only being a snippet, it's still one of Craig's biggest songs to date. He also had 4 whole tracks on Members Only Volume 3, so you can definitely tell that he was a very big part of that group, and then he ended up dropping a mixtape called Voltage, which had one more track with X called Crucify Thy Infant Son of a Definitely a weird name right there, but the song was crazy. After that, he would drop another mixtape called Hellbent, and then shortly after, X would end up passing away. And you can definitely tell that X had a very big presence on Craig's life because he went from that egomaniac kid that was fighting with everybody and trying to be the biggest in the world to somebody who was a lot more chill, had his head on his shoulders right, and was able to talk to all the fans after X's passing while the rest of the members only basically fell apart. You can tell that Craig had kind of seen this song and dance before, and he was able to kind of talk through it, and he was able to give fans exactly what they wanted, stories about X and basically the person that he was, while all the other members and members only were only finding their clout for the first time and were fighting over it. And it turns out that Craig would even go back and squash old beefs after X passed away. Unfortunately, he couldn't squash the beef with Peep anymore because he already passed away, but he would make up with other members of Schema Posse and seemed like he was turning over a new leaf. Soon after that, he would drop another project called Broken Kids Club, and it ended up having features from Ski Mask the Slump God, Smoke Perp, and even X, which is kind of interesting to see because I feel like after X passed, you never really seen a whole bunch of features on other people's projects. I mean, most of the leftover music after X passed away ended up getting put on his own solo projects, so you can definitely tell that Craig and X's connection must have been a little bit deeper if he was willing to give him a feature after he passed away. And then for the rest of 2018, he basically ended up touring around with Members Only Volume 4, getting a couple songs on there, doing a couple interviews on Montreality, and then after that, he ended up walking away from the group once and for all. You can definitely tell that Craig was only there to try to get his message out. A lot of the other people I feel like were trying to get clout off of the album, but it seems like Craig was just trying to pay respects to X one more time, talk about him, and then finally leave that part of his life behind forever. And you would think this would be the moment that he would walk away from music once and for all, but he actually ended up getting a track on Lyrical Lemonade called Death Note alongside Lil Nar and Lil Sky. Sure, he was only the feature on this track, but it's still pretty crazy to see somebody as underground as him getting on the channel. But unfortunately, it didn't really seem to blow him up the way that it did people like Snot and Jack Harlow, and after that, he ended up dropping like 2 more projects throughout 2019 and 2020, which did pretty good, got a couple music videos, and then after that, it seems like he finally fulfilled his label contract and decided to step away from music once and for all, leading many people to wonder why he decided to walk away once and for all. And I really don't feel like it's that fantastical. It's probably just because he started a family and wanted to help raise them, and at the same time, he's probably making enough money off that residual pay from all the X songs as well as the couple Peep songs, and he probably wanted to walk away when he was at his peak and not continue to embarrass himself over time. We've already seen people like Famous Dex, Smoke Perp continue to keep making music and basically destroy their legacy, becoming clowns as time goes on. But Craig did basically what he had to do to put himself in a good financial spot, and then he left when he was still at his peak. Now, surprisingly, actually in 2024, after 4 years of not dropping music, he dropped a 1-minute song. Even all this time later, with no music video and a simple song being dropped on Spotify, it seems like people noticed this, and I do wonder if he decided to come back because another YouTuber known as Zix actually ended up dropping a video on him that did kind of well. So maybe he finally saw all the buzz around his name and people having a renewed interest in his career and decided that he wanted to come back. Not sure. Or maybe he's just dropping one more piece of music for his fans so they can enjoy it and then he can walk off into the sunset once and for all. Or maybe he's just trying to test the water and see what people like. But either way, I guess a shout out to Craig Zen. I mean, he definitely did some weird stuff in his early career, but once again, we can't blame him for that. And it seems like overall, he's pretty respected within the community. And it's just nice to see a SoundCloud rapper actually end up becoming somewhat normal, getting away from drugs and, actually having a positive impact on people. Craig and Famous Dex are the same age, and you can definitely tell that both of these people went in very different directions. So maybe Famous Dex will be the next video that I make. Let me know if you want to see that. But for now, thank you for watching. Still trying to get to 15K, so if you want to subscribe, that'd be awesome. Also got a second channel if you want to subscribe there. Shout out to Knife Gang. Leave a knife emoji, but subscribe. That's what I'm looking for. If you like these videos, let me know what you want to see next, and I'm going to get to work on the next video. So see you in the next one. Peace.